It's kind of hard to think about my mission and all the logistical challenges and all the organizational challenges of delivering help and then to shift to data hygiene. I used to code. I appreciate the tremendous importance of data hygiene, but it's often a function that charities do struggle getting it right. What are some ways that you've seen work?
It's extremely important, and oftentimes we'll say before you make a major investment in new donors, or whatever you're doing, you have to make sure your house is in order to be able to keep those donors that you are bringing on. It's extremely important. And yes, I'm a data nerd, but if you don't have those fundamentals, if you don't have the legs to your table, then it's going to come crashing down. You're going to sit there and say, well, why is my program not growing? I'm spending all of this money, but I'm not seeing year over year return. We see it often when a program gets excited about maybe kicking off a new channel to acquire sustainers. But do you have your credit card updater in place? Do you have a recapture strategy? If you don't have those pieces in place before you start to invest, it's a waste. I implore organizations to pull back the onion on their data hygiene rules, their suppression rules. There's so many key things and easy things you can find out about how you're treating your donors and how the data is being stored that will ultimately help you raise more money.
My guest this week is Kate Hollandsworth, SVP of Strategy at AKwire, and a passionate champion for smarter, data-driven philanthropy. She spent more than a decade helping organizations like Amnesty International and many others raise millions. Then turned her attention to transforming how nonprofits use data to make smarter investment decisions. She's obsessed with maximizing every dollar's impact, challenging the status quo, and cutting through the noise to get to what really works. Whether it's helping organizations embrace the fundamentals of fundraising or breaking down the data barriers that keep them stuck. Kate's work is all about ensuring that every nonprofit has the insights and tools to drive real change. Kate, welcome to Giving Growth. Let's get into it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want to start with your background. I'm always interested in understanding how people industry actually got into this industry. My personal experience tells me that sometimes it's something we plan and sometimes life just happens to us. What's been your journey?
Yeah, I would say I've always wanted to help the good guys. I wanted to help make a difference. And I found that I could do that through raising money for amazing nonprofits who are making a difference in the world. So I started, focusing in on the campaigns, the messaging, multi-channel. But then I found my passion was in data, in the story that the data could tell us about where nonprofits have been. But I think more importantly, the potential where nonprofits can grow by making smarter decisions and having a clear understanding of their numbers.
And can you tell me more about AKwire? What's been the journey with AKwire?
Yeah, AKwire is an analytics and reporting company that really is the linchpin between nonprofits and their strategic partners. We help make data make sense and help our clients create plans to grow, whether that's hitting this year's revenue goal or a 5-year goal or a 10-year goal. We help create that strategic pathway, and we also help create the language that everyone understands and can strive to achieve. So those targets are agreed upon, and everybody is striving towards the same metrics, definitions of those metrics, with a shared goal of growth for the nonprofits.
And we obviously did a pre-interview, and I took many notes. And something I didn't ask you, is really around the key premise behind AKwire. Like, I imagine, having started an agency myself or a consulting business myself, that, we always start with a premise around an unmet need, in my experience. When AKwire was started, did you guys have a philosophy, or did the founders have philosophy around your purpose for being?
Oh, I love it. Purpose for being. Definitely. So there was a great need for more strategic guidance on data and analytics with an independent eye. Right? We don't have a stake in the fight if our clients decide to mail more or to go heavier with digital spend. It doesn't benefit us. All of our recommendations are based on what is best for the nonprofit. And there are obviously hundreds of thousands of nonprofits out there. And the moment we show them, pull back the curtain and show them the power of the data, of their own files, their own history of donor data, it's amazing. And it just leads to not only so many immediate changes, but so many better long-term strategic decisions that are helping grow these programs with long-term sustainable revenue.
What's a common issue that you and your team are running into again and again? Is there a use case or a situation that, when you look at it, you kind of know that the nonprofit will tell you that they're struggling with this, and you've seen this story play again and again before? Does that happen to you?
All the time. And it's happened, for years and years and years. I would say the most common thing we find when we start working with an organization is their decline in retention. Simple, right? Retaining a donor year after year. And they scratch their heads and they don't understand why they're not retaining their donors. They have extremely powerful messaging. They have great creative, beautiful emails, beautiful packages, but they're retaining less than 20% of the donors they paid for to acquire a year ago. When we come in, oftentimes we'll find out that you're not talking to half of the new donors that you brought on a year ago. You're paying a lot of money to acquire them, but there's this drop off in investment to keep them. So the focus, there's a lot of focus on bringing them in, but what are you doing? How are you treating them in their first year, which is so critical? And unfortunately, when we start pulling back the layers of our clients' data, we find that a huge percentage of the file of new donors are just never communicated with. And that could be for numerous reasons. One thing we see is over-modeling a house file with clients that are very focused on hitting a positive net. And unfortunately, we see a lot of those brand new donors getting taken out of segmentation plans because they often do have the lower negative projection on those donors. But we find that they're some of your most important donors. If you don't build that affinity in that first year, they're gone. And so it's almost the first thing I'll look at: new donor retention and promotion history, how they're being treated. And it's an easy thing to change once you know there's an issue.
So I've been excited to talk to you and to record this because I love your uncompromising perspective on asking hard questions. And you told me, and I quote, that we want to be comfortable, and it is hard to ask tough questions. And I don't think this only happens at work. I think this happens sometimes with our friends who are going through a tough time, and it's hard sometimes to face the reality. I think this happens, maybe in my relationship with my wife or my kids or my friends or my coworkers. Like, I think it's tough to have tough conversations. What's been your experience with having tough conversations when you peel the onion?
Yeah. I mean, we will often do a big audit, right? Right when we start working with a client, and in that audit presentation, all partners are typically involved. So we will have the agency of record there, and there's times when we'll unveil something that we found that has been maybe going wrong for years, and it's time to change that. We will encounter some agencies that are very defensive, and they don't want to hear that, or they'll say, no, that's not right, that's not true. But data doesn't lie. You can't misinterpret what the numbers are showing. It's fact. And it's not that we're trying to call somebody out. It's all just exposing opportunities. And, some of the best agencies out there will see an area of risk or an opportunity that we're calling out, and they'll jump on it. They will react immediately. It's not a blame game. There's no defensiveness. It's exposing an opportunity and really maximizing the opportunity to change.
So I was there was a number of reasons why I was looking forward to this conversation. One of them is that I think it puts me and my agency in a really interesting light, right? When you come to this perspective, because we, like AKwire, actually love clear data. And I have personally this philosophy of it's not good or bad, it's just information. The thing that actually makes me, I don't want to say mad, like more sad, is when I work with a for-profit or non-profit brands, and it's both that we work with. Mm-hmm. And almost always when we open up the hood, there is just a big mess in terms of data. Like tracking in the CRM, ad tech marketing being integrated, the basic things aren't getting done the right way. And I have my theories for why that's the case, but what's your experience with why it's so hard to understand where I stand as a charity? Like if I go to my bank and I bank with Chase, I know exactly how much money I have in my account. Mm-hmm. But if I'm a charity, I often don't really know answers to basic questions. Why is that?
Yeah, I think, luckily, I think there has been a shift in prioritizing data and analytics and reporting since when I started a million years ago. I would say 10 years ago, there was more emphasis on creative and how well a package looked or how good the messaging was. And, if the C-suite and the board, like the words that were coming out in the letter. I do think with companies like us, we are exposing that the best looking creative is nothing without the results. And not only the results of the initial response rates, the average gift, but how good is that donor that you brought on? Is that premium that you sent out to acquire a donor worth it if they are never going to give to you again unless you give them another stuffed animal? That information has transformed programs, and especially in the world of premiums, to sometimes get rid of that premium because there's more of a focus on building higher value donor programs. Those are the donors who are also going to stay with you, become major donors, and hopefully become a planned gift donor later on. And that pipeline of the donor journey into higher gift levels, those optics are necessary to make better decisions on the initial investment. And all of those things, I would say, together are bringing data to the forefront, but also showing the importance of data hygiene. And data hygiene, both, as you said, on a coding perspective, because if you can't accurately identify where that donor came from, where your investment was to acquire that donor or that activist, then you can't make a good investment decision going forward. And then data hygiene also when it comes to, migrating donor records too. I would say more organizations are staffing up, senior database managers, very, very experienced people who it's their only job to make sure that the health, that the hygiene of the file is up to par. And all of those things will impact file growth, right? If you're a donor and you have 5 different IDs to one organization, you might be getting 5 different messages. One could be talking to you like you're a new donor. One could be talking to you like you've been around for 5+ years and actively giving. And another message could say, we haven't heard from you in 3 years. How does that impact a donor? They're going to get turned off and they are not going to give again. And then that will impact all of your donor metrics.
I want to talk about investment planning, but I'm kind of holding myself back from going there yet, because when you said data hygiene, that sounds to someone who maybe hasn't been in data deeply boring or overwhelming. It's kind of like, waking up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym. I really don't know anyone who's super excited about doing that. And yet you kind of have to do it if you want to, let's say, run a marathon, right? If you have big goals. And I think that many charities want to run a marathon. Like, they want to be here for as long as they're needed, because what they're doing is very important. And it's kind of hard to think about my mission and all the logistical challenges and all the organizational challenges of delivering help, and then to shift to data hygiene. Now, I used to code SAS. I appreciate the tremendous importance of data hygiene, but it's often a function that has a huge responsibility, but charities do struggle getting it right.
Yeah.
Why?
I see it.
And what are some ways to not get it wrong and get it right that you've seen work out?
Yeah. No, it's extremely important. And oftentimes we'll say, before you make a major investment in new donors, whatever you're doing, you have to make sure your house is in order to be able to keep those donors that you are bringing on. It's extremely important. And yes, I'm a data nerd, but if you don't have those fundamentals, if you don't have the legs to your table, then it's going to come crashing down, and you're going to sit there and say, well, why is my program not growing? I'm spending all of this money, but I'm not seeing year-over-year return. We see it often when a program gets excited about maybe kicking off a new channel to acquire sustainers. But do you have your credit card updater in place? Do you have a recapture strategy? If you don't have those pieces in place before you start to invest, it's a waste. I think it's a waste. So, I mean, I implore organizations to pull back the onion on their data hygiene rules, their suppression rules. We haven't talked about that. There's so many key things and easy things you can find out about how you're treating your donors and how the data is being stored that will ultimately help you raise more money.
This is why this is a little tough for me, because I agree with everything you're saying. It's hard for me to stay impartial. How I think about this, just to add to what you said, is that I think we want to hit an easy button. And I get it. Like, I would love to hit an easy button too sometimes, because I'm tired,
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed, or I don't have the right enough money to invest in something that I would love to get done. And I think charities, especially in my experience, there's something unfair going on with, for example, these expense ratios. The more I talk to people in the industry, people like yourself, I think it's a bit of a, bringing a knife to a gunfight. The charities are having to do with one hand tied behind the back. And I wish that there was a process to free up capacity or resources to have someone on the team who knows these areas, and AKwire obviously steps in, and what I
Yeah.
do steps in too. But there's something about people in charities just having more time to ask the tough questions and slow down. And and I don't want to blame charity leaders because I have lots of empathy for them. And I wish they had more capacity to slow down and have a time to like really, to your point, peel the onion. My theory is that's one of the core issues, that there's lack of time and there's lots of distractions.
Yeah, definitely. And I do worry about a lot of nonprofits that take on this responsibility, and they maybe give this role of investment planning and forecasting to a junior analyst who doesn't have the experience. And that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody who doesn't have maybe the best forecasting tool to make these hugely powerful recommendations for where an organization can grow. And tied to the investment ratio issue, it's happening more often. And when clients have us help, create the picture of maybe the first 2 years, the cost ratio isn't going to be great. But when we show what the continued investment is on, let's say, sustainers, the cost ratio will improve 3+ years down the road. But it's so essential to have, I would say, a third party to provide that information so that you can speak up to leadership, up to the board to say, if we cut investment now, this is the negative growth we will see 5 years, 10 years down the road. But if we are okay for the next 2 years having a not so great cost ratio, it will be best in the long run in the growth of this organization.
Can you share an example of a decision that you've seen be made that was the wrong decision, probably because there was no access to the right data? As a lesson, what should charities look out for that
Yeah.
you believe could be a mistake that they should pay attention to?
We've seen it's tied to I think one of the first things that we had about knowing the donor journey of your brand new donors. When programs were being told they had to hit a specific net number, and so they had to make
donors.
net revenue.
Uh-huh.
They had a net revenue goal, and there was a lot of pressure to cut as many net negative cohorts of donors from these programs. And so what they ended up doing is, seeing horrible new donor retention. And then they had to spend more money the next year to reacquire new donors. And so that bubble of poor internal investment planning, right? Not just external, but internal investment planning on your house file, that led to a huge impact on negative growth for them. So I think it's understanding that these initial decisions, for instance, to focus on net, can have very negative impact on your file down the road.
And this is a great segue to what I wanted to ask you for several minutes, which is, what is investment planning? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, investment planning is just a piece of the organization's overall growth plan. And the investment planning for us guides clients on what is the investment needed to hit your overall organizational goal. And so when we look at investments, we're looking at the projected cost per donor for each potential entry stream into your organization, knowing that each channel has a different cost per donor structure. But looking at that holistic view of all of your entry points going in, it helps you create a plan that, maybe overall gets you to a 3-year break even, but some channels are going to take longer than others. And there's scalability too that comes with that. So some channels do have the ability to to push more money, to push more investment into them. And some don't. And so creating new donor targets, reactivation targets, by channel, by program, and then wrapping that up to give you a holistic investment picture, we think is the best way to go.
Look, I like the word investment planning because when it comes to, for example, managing media, I always discourage my team to use the words like spend or budget, because spend is to be spent, right? So you can make a percentage. And that's totally the wrong philosophy. So we talk about investing budgets because that comes with the responsibility of creating a return. What's the biggest challenge you've come across in getting charities to adopt a philosophy that's rooted in investment planning?
Yeah, oftentimes it's pulling teeth to get projected costs per donor from partners, I would say. And our theory on that is that it doesn't need to be perfect, but we do need a number. And so understanding that, seasonality is at play. In December, your cost per donor for an online donor is going to go down. But we would input different projected costs, by month based on that. You have to start somewhere, and you have to input as much information as you can, but then also being flexible, right? If there's a surge, if there's an environmental issue that is causing a huge increase of new donors coming into your file, adapting the investment model to potentially lower that cost per donor and then ramp up. So I think part of that investment plan is, yes, you have a plan, but you also need to be agile and flexible and reactive when opportunities come up. So your plan on day one is likely not going to look like your plan on day 100. And then at the end of the fiscal year, it'll probably look pretty different.
When I talk to charity leaders, and this is often C-level execs, and I ask what's the number one challenge to meeting your goals, this surprises me, but I will hear sometimes partnership with finance. And when I hear investment planning, that to me, and this is very much, by the way, a leading question, full disclosure, but I find that it's exactly the thing that charities perceive as a challenge that's actually a huge opportunity. Closer partnership with finance. I mean, investment planning smells and sounds like partnership with finance. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
We love finance teams, but it often takes about 6 months to move from I don't want to say a questionable relationship to move into that loving relationship. I think the finance teams are often, the people who have been with the organization the longest. And there's so much valuable history that we as analysts can glean from them. But it's also, an educational piece for them to learn about all these amazing new things that we say are important to tracking. Because, many of them are very cost and revenue focused, and there's not much in between. And we're the in between, right? We expose, the LTV, the ROI, the retention, the donor value, all of those super key important metrics, but they all need to reconcile at the end of the day with finance. Otherwise, you'll be at war for your relationship with them. So when we'll often show that, a diagram of where AKwire fits in with the puzzle, we always put the finance team in that piece because we want an open relationship with them. But more importantly, we need them to trust us. And so oftentimes we'll do a monthly reconciliation with them. And once we form that trust, it ends up being wonderful. They lean on us, we lean on them. We see their importance, and then they see our importance in this puzzle.
So I have if you talk to my kids or my teammates, I'm full of quotes. I love these verbal shortcuts that speak to something deeper. And I know we've all heard this before. The more I put in, the more I get out. I personally wish that more senior fundraising or marketing professionals at charities, that they put in more time to create a relationship with finance that's highly functioning, that's based on me as a fundraising professional. And by the way, I see the same thing with my insurance clients and credit card clients, because all of our customers are in what we call recurring revenue space. There's a monthly payment, whether it's $20 a month or $500 a month, whether it's for a credit card or my monthly donation. The mechanics behind the scenes is exactly the same.
Mhm.
But everybody in both for-profit and nonprofit industries suffers from this idea that finance isn't my friend. And I wish that that changed. And I think change comes from, and I know it's cliche, but within. So, that's kind of my point of view on this. But I want to shift to something you shared with me earlier, which was that we're all stuck in this paradigm of the giving pyramid.
Hmm.
And, in the typical giving pyramid, right? Classic giving pyramid, we have mass, mid, major donors. And we here at Delve Deeper do see cracks in the pyramid.
Mhm.
You said acquisition costs, they are not going down. Another crack is that younger donors care more about causes than charities. They don't understand the system the charities have built to deliver help, because I think that the industry doesn't do a great job of explaining how amazing they are, how hard it is to deliver aid to different parts of the world. But having said that, you shared something very interesting with me about chasing younger donors at the expense of older, maybe more loyal donors. Can you unpack this?
Yeah, I won't say who, but organizations have come to us and said, we want more new donors, right? We want to show our board that our file is getting younger. It's not getting older. But that's not where the money is. That's not where the major donors are coming from. That's not where obviously the planned gift givers are coming from. So I think it has to be a balance, but it can't be I would say a major focus. You cannot lose sight of where your most loyal donors are and where they probably will continue to come from for years and years. But leadership doesn't like seeing that their files are getting older. I don't mind it, as long as you're also building a more loyal donor base as well. Yeah, I mean, not losing sight of acquiring younger donors, but just not making it the focus, not making it the most important thing.
One reflection I had after our initial conversation was around averages. So if I look at typical average of a donor, it's obviously going up. I see charities where that average is 65 years old, 71 years old, which tells you some donors are 55 and others are 85, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's they're not 25 as an average donor.
Yeah.
And my reflection was that if my average age of a donor is 65, if I reframe the question, I said, okay, it's 65 and maybe it was 65 years ago. So they're getting older and obviously they are going to age out.
Mhm.
But if I focus on maybe acquiring donors who are 55 now or 50, if I have more of them, that will lower my average age. And it isn't going after millennials or Gen Zs, but it is going after people who simply have the money to donate.
Yeah.
What are you hearing?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The other thing I would say too is a lot of organizations don't know age demographic on their file, but that can be easily accessed. And oftentimes you can add it for free if you know the right people. But first is starting, right? Starting with appending that age data to your file. Yes, I would agree that middle group, you said around 55, is highly valuable. When you do have that age data appended to your file, you can make better decisions on maybe where that age range is coming from, which channels you are finding them in, maybe what messaging is attracting that age range. The other thing about age that's interesting is there's also a different cost per donor structure. You should be making different investments based on the age of the donor you're acquiring. It's hard to do that in a lot of different channels, but one channel where we can see age being applied is in canvassing. So when you are acquiring sustainers, you should look into negotiating a lower cost structure for a younger donor. And you can show your vendor partners the data that a younger donor acquired from canvassing is going to be worth anywhere from 10 to 25% less than a donor who's, let's say, over 35. So you're okay with that vendor acquiring those young college kids, but you should not be paying the same amount of money for that 25-year-old than that 55-year-old, which it's harder to find that 55-year-old on the street. But thinking about investments and age should be a part of that contract process.
So let's assume that I, reached out to AKwire. I was able to append age, or date of birth for, all or most of my donors. And I'm learning that, yes, they are, let's say, 65 on average. And maybe over time, that file is getting older. And most charities I talk to do see that trend. What could I do in digital to investment plan better than what you see happen now?
Yeah. I would definitely be looking at the age data when it comes to the specific media buys of where those key donors are coming from. And not only the placements, but also what is the messaging and creative that is bringing those donors on. I think that could be very valuable if you had a goal of acquiring a certain age range. And there's not a magic solution for all organizations. I would say your organization could be very different from another. And so if your example, you said, acquiring a 65 age donor, that might not be the right age for another group that maybe has more of a focus on planned gifts. And they're okay with acquiring an older donor who's, probably coming in at a higher value and is closer to either making that major gift or that planned gift. So it's kind of an evaluation of what is the priority for your organization.
I want to build on that question or your point on priority, because what I find, and this is based on 25 years in marketing, most of it is digital. I find that especially in the age of digital, where even years ago and especially today, we try to outsource and hit that easy button with an algorithm that's built into media buying tools. We actually forget about the foundational concepts of marketing. And with my team, I say marketers market markets. And what I mean by this is that if I'm in fundraising, if I'm in marketing, if I'm driving the strategy for who I am as a charity, what problem I'm solving, and who are the donors I should be going after, that are the perfect fit for my brand, there's a bit of a failure and opportunity to pick a couple angles and go in on those angles. So to your point, maybe if the angle is right now, it's all about bequests, do we just do that and nothing else? And that totally changes my strategy then if I'm going after a 25-year-old millennial versus if I'm going after someone who's, 55 years old. And I struggle sometimes when talking to charities, because they seem unwilling, and it's not just charities. I'm not picking on charities. every brand and every marketer or fundraising professional I talk to struggles with their ability to pick a narrow lane to get something done because they're pulled in so many directions by all the constituents, right? Or by donors, by the board, by the CEO. Do you see this happen? Is it just me?
No, it's not just you. And I often use the word diversification and how important that is to not have so much of a narrow focus, because if you have a narrow focus, a narrow message, you're really limiting the potential of an expanded audience to come into your file. And also the diversification also helps with, maximizing opportunities. Let's say if there's a political event that is happening that could drive growth to your nonprofit. Are you in multiple avenues? Are you all over social? Are you all over search? Do you have those key tools in place to maximize the opportunities when they come up? Also with multiple messaging on hand to go to pivot to if you need to. I think having programs that have a menu, a suite of pre-approved language ready to launch are having the most success and seizing the opportunities when they arise.
You talked about brutal honesty. Something that I talk to C-suite about at charities is the fact that rich are getting richer, poor are getting poorer. I think this is impacting. This is my assumption that's impacting the structure of the file. There is a reason why people who, and the word poor is obviously, I don't know what that means exactly, but there's something about it's harder to make a living. So obviously it's harder for me to find the money that's disposable to donate to a cause. And I think the giving pyramid is wobbly because of those kinds of changes in society. And I also think that that's something that's really hard for me to control as a charity leader. And there are other cracks in that pyramid that maybe are controllable. Is there a crack, or is there a driver of instability for the file that I have that you think is like a theme of the year that you've been talking about a lot, or that you see sort of bubble up more and more?
Yeah. I wouldn't say there's a specific or just one theme of the year, but I think every nonprofit is nervous about what could happen in society and how that will impact their fundraising going forward. And I think maybe not the crack, but the glue that I'm hoping teams will focus on is retaining as many donors as they can as possible, because investment dollars could be impacted. That outward investment of new donor growth could be impacted. And making sure that, all those different data issues that we talked about are corrected. Because I do think nonprofits are going to have to do more with the donor base they have, whether that's active current donors or tapping into their at-risk and lapsed donors. Some of the larger nonprofits have millions of lapsed donors who I think could use additional modeling and mining to bring them back. And oftentimes, we do just have to look inward when there is outward crisis around us that we can't have control over, tied to making sure every donor is being looked after and being included in asks. Being comfortable asking donors for less. So decreasing an ask amount, maybe when a donor gets into what we'd say is an at-risk part of their life cycle, and not waiting too long. We saw, many donors make stretch gifts in, times of humanitarian crisis, political crisis, and being aware that stretch gift was maybe a one-time, big gift that came through. knowing your data and knowing the point where you should start to ask for maybe less, I think is also important, so that those cracks and cracks in our foundation don't get any bigger.
Imagine that you are talking to a number of executives in the industry, and there's one metric that you talk about that you think they need to get move in the right direction. What would be that KPI? What would be that number, that
Just one?
dimension? Just one.
Killing me. I started with it and I'll end with it. Retention. Everything you do can be tracked by the retention of your donors, the retention of your dollars. That is so essential to raise the necessary funds to be able for our nonprofits to execute on their missions. If we can't retain donors, we need to look at our systems. Where are the cracks in our processes? Are the cracks in our messaging, in our creative? What can we change to improve the retention so that our nonprofits can continue to do this amazing work?
So to follow up on that point, and now we are in June. Many charities are slowly gearing up for the holidays. What can that fundraising professional do in June to make sure that this influx of new donors, which always happens later in the year, that they actually are retained at a higher rate as we go into 2026 than maybe when we were going to 2025? Is there something they should be paying attention to and working on now that's maybe important, but not urgent right now, but it will be urgent in 6 months, that you would advise them to really pay attention to?
Yeah. I mean, if you have the time now to focus on your data hygiene, that would be great to have that in place before Giving Tuesday, before December. And data hygiene, look at your donor records and maybe merging to identify duplicates, to clean that up before you send a donor 3 different messages in November. One key thing also is reviewing how new donors are being treated in their first 3 months, in their first 6 months. You may think you know everything a new donor is getting, but give a gift. Make a dummy account and give a gift online. Give a gift through the mail with 2 different addresses if you can, and track the treatment. And do that in June, so that when you get an influx of new donors in November and December, which typically is when a whole lot of new donors come into these nonprofits, you can make those necessary adjustments to their donor journey. Again, you may think you know how they're being treated, but you really don't know until you actually run through that process.
Look, I love that example because it doesn't cost you any money, but it does
No.
require, to your earlier point, focus on a metric, which is why I was asking you to define one. And I think there's still plenty of time to wrap one's arms around that metric, and then to actually know what's really going on, and to have a better Q4 because of that. My final question: what do you know about brutal honesty in nonprofits today that you wish you knew earlier?
Brutal honesty. That I wish I knew.
What do you know today that you wish you had known sooner?
That no matter how difficult the news is, you shouldn't be the only one to know it. That goes for whether you're telling a nonprofit or you're telling their agency partner. Everything should be on the table, and that transparency is so key and fundamental, I would say, to having a team, a holistic team that is all on the same page and striving to do better and to change whatever needs to be changed to fix something or to capitalize on an opportunity. but you need to tell everyone in the room what's going on. I mean, they might not want to hear it, but they need to know it.
Kate Hollandsworth, SVP of Strategy at AKwire, thank you so much. My wish for the industry is that they follow your guidance, that we start this process from within, that we start by thinking about what's really most important. Is there, like you said, it's a portfolio strategy. We need to have several sort of tools in our tool belt or angles to go after, but there is something about having one unifying metric that we can focus on improving. And I think there is a certain amount of relief and clarity that that approach provides.
Great. Thank you, Fred.
Thank
It's been
you.
great.